with Senate File 132 that we had the testimony on the other day. Get that done as rapidly as possible, and then go to the main charter school bill, which is 174. And I will apologize in advance. I've got a bill that's coming up in the Committee 10, which is meeting right now. And once we're done 132, even if I'm not yet summoned, I'm going to turn the committee over to Cinder Steinmetz so she can deal with the charter school. And we're going to want to get the testimony on that done, and if possible, work the bill. Get it done. We're getting jammed up toward the end. So with that, are we live properly?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we're live.
Okay. Committee will come to order. Senate File 132, continuation on that, the study of the K-2 education program. Senator Ellis, there's an extensive amendment here with your name on it. Tell us what we're up to here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment looks large, but it really isn't. You'll recall on our discussion on this bill, the prior time we met, on page 3 and 4, the superintendent's office requested that we strike paragraphs 3 or contained in Romanet 3, Romanet 4, onto page 4, the remainder of that page, and then also requested, and we just remove those as study requirements. The amendment you see doesn't delete that language. Instead, it adds an additional paragraph, leaving that language intact, but clarifying that the department may study those certain subjects. So if they have the bandwidth, they can, certainly look into them, but it's not mandatory. And I think keeping that language in there preserves a little bit of the intent of where we're trying to head with looking at the study in the first place. So the remainder of the amendment just kind of makes some clarifications, conforming amendments, renumbering paragraphs. But then you'll also see that it would change the due date for the report to be completed on November 1st on page 5, line 1. It would also strike lines 15 and 17 on page 5. That was the requirement that the state board adopt uniform graduation standards by that date. I think that work is ongoing. So it's a pretty straightforward amendment. I visited with the department. I think we're in good shape on that, and then happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Committee, I'm going to come to the department briefly before we vote. Everybody understand the committee, what we're up to here? Department, do you have any quick comments on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, we're okay with that amendment.
Okay, very good. Let me say one thing to you. When we change the date to November, it is probable, unless we change things, that we will only have one meeting. And if the study is going to produce any legislative recommendations, it would sure be helpful if we knew about that with 2 meetings still to go. So that then we could get something drawn that the committee had some idea where we were going before we hit just the final meeting. So that we can talk back and forth over the summer as you progress, but we'll need to know if there is going to be a legislative ask, we're going to need to know of it enough ahead, or we're going to have to get an extra meeting day or something. Because if it's of any complication, hitting a committee cold with the legislation in the last meeting where it's a voted up or down and you don't have much chance to maneuver it can be a problem. So that November date does create a problem, and we'll have to work together to get around that if the study is going to produce a legislative need for that budget session. Okay. Committee, I'll move the motion. I'll move the amendment. Basically, we're concentrating it on those first 2 topics and giving them some flexibility and getting rid of that one provision. Everybody understand what we're doing? Okay? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carried. Back on the bill. Do I hear a motion on the bill? Motion is due pass as amended. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Call the roll, please.
Senator Beitman. Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss. Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Scott.
Aye.
5 ayes.
5 ayes. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 132. Sherry, no, excuse me, that's the one, 174, excuse me. Senator Steinmetz, will you take over the committee?
Yes.
And I'll move where I can get out rapidly.
All right. So we'll be taking up Senate File 174, Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board, and the good Senator Ellis, I believe, is going to present that bill for us today. Welcome back, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alrighty, Senators, before you have Senate File 174, and just to put this in some context before we dive in, Wyoming has had charter school law on its books for a number of years, but it really required that anyone wanting to open a charter school had to work with a local school district in their community to get that charter school up and running. We heard concerns that there was maybe some conflicts there. Certainly in some communities, maybe it worked better than others, but there were definitely concerns that maybe there were some financial interests that were preventing charter schools from reaching agreements with their districts. In looking at what was occurring nationally and in other states, a lot of other states also encountered this situation. And so rather than just having one avenue for a charter school to receive authorization to open, other states created a separate authorizer. So last year, or in recent years, the legislature has looked to create a separate authorizer rather than just school districts. The first step that we did in moving toward that direction was to have our State Lands and Investments Board, which is composed of our statewide elected officials, serve as that separate authorizer. Other states actually set up their own commissions that require staffing and funding, and I think Wyoming, we wanted to kind of put our toe in the water to see what it would look like to have a separate authorizer. Rather than create a new commission to do that, we selected the SLIB with the caveat that they would only be allowed to approve 3 new charter schools statewide. And so that made sense when you were thinking about applications and an entity that kind of had a statewide look, if you will. My understanding, and there are others way more familiar in the audience about how that's gone, but there have been 3 schools that have applied and have been selected by the SLIB. And so I think there is an interest and appetite out there, Madam Chair, to expand this and to create a separate entity that would look more holistically as a separate authorizer for charter schools wanting to come online. So that's what Senate File 174 seeks to do. It seeks to establish a separate authorizer that would be made permanent, largely housed within the Department of Education. And we can walk through the bill. So on page 1, you'll see that this would be the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board. It would consist of the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, a member appointed by the Senate, a member appointed by the Speaker of the House. On to page 3, 2 members appointed by the governor. Each member shall represent the public interest and satisfy all of these requirements. And these are pretty consistent with practices that we see with other commissions and boards in Wyoming, but also having some experience to serve on this commission. So 1, we want them to be a resident of the state, possess experience in public or nonprofit governments, management of finances, public school leadership, those kinds of things. And then just demonstrated commitment to advancing charter schools. I think that there are some people who don't see the benefit of charter schools and are very anti-charter schools. So we want to make sure we don't want to put people who hate charter schools on the charter school board. And then this is just a catch-all. We want to make sure that no person appointed to this board has any financial interest in the operation of that school. We're moving on to page 4. You'll see just basic language about appointments to the board, that kind of vacancies going on to paragraph G. And it's a big bill, Madam Chair, so I'm going to try and move through it fast. But if anyone wants to stop at any point, we can certainly do that. Page 5, requirements of how often the board needs to meet. and then just standard language about compensation. So moving on to page 5, section 2, you're going to see the amended language in our existing statute. And this is where it gets a little complicated, Madam Chair, and a little clunky, but I think LSO has done a really good job of trying to incorporate new concepts and amend our existing statutory framework. So moving on to page 6, here you're going to see the amendment to the duties of the state superintendent. Here she is to designate an employee of the Department of Education to serve as a liaison to the Charter School Authorizing Board. This person will provide assistance not only to the board, and the superintendent, I believe, is here to answer questions specific to how this might work within her department, but what kind of support that person will not only provide to the board, but to the actual charter schools themselves to ensure compliance. Moving on to page 7, here you'll see some amendments to the definition section in Title 21. There'll be a new definition for a full-time virtual charter school, as well as a new definition of what a governing board includes. And this would mean an independent board of charter school that is a party to a charter contract with the authorizer and whose members have been selected pursuant to the charter application. Here, this is moving on to the bottom of page 7. This amends the definition of what authorizers are allowed to do. So going on to page 8, you'll see how we want them to base their decisions. Some amendments to clarify that any decision to renew, not renew, or revoke a charter would require using documented evidence collected through the charter's application process, followed policies that are transparent and based on merit to avoid any conflicts of interest, demonstrate public accountability. We want folks negotiating and executing in good faith a charter school contract with each charter school authorized, establish and maintain policies that are consistent with the principles and professional standards for authorizers of charter schools, and then more additional clarifying requirements. This requires a look at the organizational capacity and infrastructure of a charter school. Certainly, some of these charter schools might be located in smaller communities. What is the plan for those smaller communities behind the scenes to make sure that they're complying with all federal and state statutes? Larger charter schools and larger organizations, might have bigger capacity for that. So just making sure that that capacity is there. Some of these charters actually can hire out and contract out some of those services. So we want those to all be taken into consideration. Going on to page 9, you'll see more of that discussion, ongoing oversight, and any other charter application approval, renewal, and revocation decision-making. So here on beginning on line 10 on page 9, here's the discussion on what will be considered in order to do that initial approval. And here it would be to grant charters to applicants that possess competence in elements of the application requirements. And again, base decisions on evidence collected through the application process. Moving on to the bottom of page 9, this is a conforming amendment, and this is an important one. The department is here again. They can answer more specific questions about how this might look. But this is current language you'll see. Funding for authorizers shall consist of an administrative fee collected from the charter school, and it can be up to 3%. Here, there's some definitions that say the authorizer shall restrict the use of these funds, going on to page 10, to fulfill their purposes under the duties of this article. And in an effort to ensure transparency, this would require them to annually publish and submit to the state superintendent's office a report detailing how they use these funds. We will talk more about this, but I do want to flag this. This is an important part of the bill. Moving on to line 7, paragraph D on page 10. This is paragraph talks about what would be looked at in the event that a charter schools would need to be revoked. And here, if there is no legal compliance or unsatisfactory compliance with anything in their contract or anything with law, here the authorizer would be required to notify the charter school in writing of the problem, allow them some time to correct that problem, and if they don't, then revocation might be warranted. I believe a lot of these details, though, however, can be fleshed out through rule, but we wanted to make sure the department had clear language to make sure that they would develop those rules further. Here, you'll see some language. This on page 10, line 19, this just changed that conversion from it being the SLIB as the authorizer to the Wyoming Charter School authorizer. Moving on to page 11, In our last effort to address this, there are some charter schools that specialize in dealing with at-risk students. We believe that maybe removing some of this prioritization for these kind of schools maybe was a little premature and maybe not appropriate. So here we just eliminate that preference for those charter schools, providing no preference at all. So that's what that language seeks to do. Bottom of page 11, conforming amendment, just saying, talking about a contract in lieu of the application. Moving on to page 12, this is a departure. And this, I will confess, the department can probably explain a little bit more. But here, this has to do with that fee that is already in place that allows the charter school to operate. We're striking some language there in paragraph G and inserting some new language which would say that pursuant to the terms of the charter contract, a charter school can be part of the state system of public education. A charter school shall not be subject to the state's education statutes or any state or local rule, regulation, or policy procedure relating to public schools. So this is kind of a lengthy paragraph, but I think the intent here is to give the charter schools the flexibility that they're seeking. There are definitely charter schools I'm aware of that don't necessarily have requirements that a teacher be certified under, the state's governing statutes over teachers and some other requirements. So this is seeking to give charter schools some of that flexibility in hiring and meeting other certain requirements. And this is kind of the purpose of charter schools. Moving on to page 11, you'll see that although we're allowing these charter schools to have some more flexibility, they are not allowed to waive any requirements as they relate to assessments or standards. So those will remain in place. And I think we will see that an additional amendment brought, and I have handed out, two amendments will be handed out to you. We also want to make sure that they can't waive any requirements that have to do with the health, safety, or anything of that sort for children. So moving on down here, you'll see not further language clarifying that nothing in the subsection shall be deemed to exempt a charter school from having the powers necessary to carry out the terms of their charter contract. And then you'll see that clarifying amendment about hiring employees. Moving on to page 14, an amendment here is talking about just the negotiation process of charter school contracts and their authorizer. Page 15, more conforming language on lines 5, 6, and 7. But then on G, we just have more conflict of interest provisions. Again, just wanting to make sure that any charter school, not just in the appointment of the board, which we talked about before, but in the actual board of a charter school, that there are no conflicts of interest. So that's what paragraph G seeks to accomplish. Same with paragraph R. Here's just talking about compensation of education services. Education services shall be prohibited from serving as a voting member on the governing board of any charter school. Moving on to page 16, this is just a necessary paragraph saying that charter school governing boards shall have access to education service provider records as necessary to make sure that they're able to deliver on their service provider contracts. The rest of these are really just the mechanics of how the bill works, and I don't know if now's, I know I'm kind of moving through this, but it's a pretty significant bill. Are there any questions? Coffee break.
All right.
Okay.
Please proceed.
So on page 16, this talks about, this provision in our statutes talks about contract contents, renewal, revocation, closure, appeals. Here we've got some new language that says within 75 days of the approval of a charter application, the governing board and the authorizer shall enter into a contract that establishes the academic and operational performance expectations and measures by which the charter school will be evaluated. And here's just some more information about what that contract shall contain. Here we've got, I guess, again, building on existing language, the written instrument is a separate document from the charter application and shall be the final authorizing document for the charter school. Just adding some clarification, because we're trying to set up governing boards for each of these schools. So there's an application, but it's not necessarily finalized by a contract. So some of this language is intended to bridge some of that formality of the negotiated contract versus kind of the final authorization. So a lot of that language is in recognition that maybe the board hasn't been solidified because they haven't been approved, but we want to make sure that they're still bound as that informal until they've been finalized. So here in Romanet 2 on the bottom of page 16, that these contracts shall be executed by the authorizer and the charter school, describe the rights and duties of each party. I think the rest of this is on kind of onto page 17, conforming language. On page 17, line 7, though, we had some requirements in here about looking at progress, and this would change that definition. Currently, it's at least one time in each 5-year period the charter's in effect. Here, we want more transparency, more oversight. So this would be a look at how the charter school is progressing each year. The contract would also describe the method to be used to monitor and evaluate a charter school. And so here you're going to see just language. This is really to address concerns that somehow charter schools are going to provide less quality education. And so here we're just wanting to say that these educational institutions will be robust. They're going to allow for the inclusion of additional rigorous, valid, and reliable indicators proposed by the charter school to augment any external evaluations of their performance. It can include other terms and conditions agreed to by the authorizer and the charter school's governing board, including pre-opening conditions, going on to page 18. And we are clarifying these shall not include enrollment caps. These are things that they could include depending on the circumstance, or any operational requirements that place undue constraints on charter schools that are contradictory to the article. Again, we just want to make sure we're not setting up these charter schools for failure, again, trying to provide an additional hurdle for them to be authorized. And then just some, I'm not even going to pretend, that's, I think, Romanet 19, that these agreements have to be signed by the chair of the authorizing board and the chair of the governing board of the charter school. And then finally, that they be submitted to the state superintendent of public instruction. Here, we want to, on the bottom of page 18, paragraph F, the authorizer shall make a final ruling on the renewal application not later than April 1st of the following year. You might see a request to change that April 1st date to not later than 30 days. I'll let the superintendent's office, I've been working with them on some potential amendments, but I just wanted to flag that language. And then you'll see the April 1st, this would kind of address that concern of why April 1st maybe doesn't make sense. Page 19, paragraph H, provides for a closure protocol. I think we've heard a lot of concerns of what happens if these schools are not successful. What if they're not meeting the needs that they said that they were going to address when they were opening? And so this would require the authorizer, in conjunction with this charter school, to develop a closure protocol if necessary. So more detail on that on paragraph H. Paragraph J talks about the migration of current schools that were authorized under the SLIB, how they would be migrated to be managed by this new Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board. So that would go on to page 20. This section deals with, again, just some conforming amendments about that migration or the converted charter school. So on paragraph E, these converted charter schools shall continue to comply with all state and federal requirements. And then more language again about the converted charter school shall hire its own employees and an employee who works in a converted charter school onto page 21 to be an employee of that school. And then paragraph G just talks about the students who attended the converted charter school, how their enrollment preferences. We just want to make sure that that transition is helping those students. On to paragraph 21, or excuse me, on the bottom of page 21, line 22, this is a clarifying amendment that wants to make clear that pupil outcomes, as we look at these charter schools, includes those with special education needs. So 21 onto 22. These really I view as kind of conforming amendments. Page 22, line 5, instead of the method of pupil progress, just clarifying that the schools plan for using internal and external assessments to measure pupil progress. And then line 20, or on page 22, line 9, instead of saying the governance structure, clarifying amendment that says the bylaws and organizational chart that clearly presents the school organizational structure and lines of authorities, that this is the process that will be used to govern schools to ensure parental, teacher, and community involvement. The the rest of that language, I think, is pretty straightforward on the bottom of just kind of some conforming amendments. Same with the most of the language on 23, until you get to the bottom of page 23. This talks about the school's plan for identifying and successfully serving students with special education needs, who are English language learners, students who are academically behind, and gifted students. What kind of coverage those students are to receive. And so I think I'm just a little lost in my explanation, Madam Chair. I apologize, but there's just additional language in the charter, in amending the existing statutes right there. Page 24, I think these are all largely conforming amendments. Going on to page 5, more conforming amendments. And then page 25, paragraph G, this is something that is important to highlight. Here, the charter school may appeal the authoriser's decision to revoke or not renew a charter application. Right now, we have the language as first to the superintendent and then to the district court where the charter school is located. This doesn't affect those charters where a charter school has been authorized by the school board. This, right now, if the charter is denied by a school board and they appeal, it goes to the State Board of Education. For this process, it would go through a separate appeal, However, in visiting with the superintendent's office, it might make sense to strike that the appeal be made first to her office since she serves on the authorizing board. So rather than that, you will see an amendment that requests that those appeals just be made to a district court. On the bottom of page 25, this language is also important, and this has to do with funding and ADM. Here in paragraph C, this is existing language, but as part of the charter school's contract, the charter school and the school district shall agree on funding and any services to be provided by the school district to the charter schools. So this kind of language contemplates that the agreement is with the charter school. So that's the authorizer, or there's that agreement between the district and the charter school. So going on to page 25, you will hear more from the department on this page, and this has to do with the funding. So the current agreement as it stands would require a look at ADM, and then the district would receive a certain percentage of those funds, which really does put these charter schools at a financial disadvantage. So you will see an amendment, and I think the LSO has handed those out to you. The superintendent and I have talked about what it would look like to clarify how that could work a little bit better so that some of the funds remain more in the charter school's hands. So if you look at amendment number 2 that I've handed out to you, and I'll let the department explain this a little bit better. But essentially, we just want to make sure that, again, we're not setting these charter schools up for failure by giving them substantially reduced amounts. So you will see an amendment, and I'll let the superintendent's office and superintendent explain that a little bit better than me, but that language is critical on the funding piece. And so again, just kind of going down the road, this is more on the funding piece on page 26. Page 27, paragraph 4 has to do with special education and transportation. Here you'll see the reimbursement rate at 100%. That's currently what we reimburse in our statutes already. So that would be consistent. And again, just making sure those kids are being treated equally. And then paragraph 5, I think you'll see in that amendment that there's a request to delete this paragraph in Romanet 5. Here, this language says that the State Department of Education shall retain a 5% of all funding from the school district. Because of that language that's already existing with 3%, in visiting with the superintendent's office, we don't think that that paragraph will be necessary. So that isn't included in the amendment. Section 3, you'll see some repealers that are no longer necessary because of this enactment. And then finally, section 4, this is some budget request that would authorize for 2 new full-time positions. You'll see in the amendment that we could probably strike this paragraph entirely and address this through the budget itself, since it's moving right now, the supplemental budget. So that's the bill, Madam Chair. The last page is on page 28. The act would take effect on July 1st, 2023. It's a big bill. I hope I've done it justice, but that's the general overview of what it does. And there's more work to be done. As Mr. Chairman indicated, he had another committee hearing that he needs to present a big bill on. Chairman Scott asked that an amendment be prepared, which you'll see is amendment number 1, which you should have received. Some of his amendments, I'm happy to have visited with the chairman, understand his rationale. Some of them are, grammatical changes that he'd like to see. And then there are a couple of other things that we could probably, I can discuss further with you when it comes time to work the bill, Madam Chair, if you want to give me that flexibility. So
Okay,
with that,
thank you.
happy to answer
Yes.
any questions.
Yep, questions committee, questions for Senator Ellis? No questions at this time, but we will bring you back up. Are there any other legislators in the room that would like to testify on this bill? Welcome, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just be brief because I don't want to walk deep into the bill, but just talk real broadly that as you all probably recall, a few sessions ago, we passed a pilot program allowing for allowing for more charter schools in Wyoming. Through that pilot program, and I apologize if Senator Ellis already talked about this, but I missed the first few minutes of her presentation. But through that pilot program, it was capped at 3 charter schools. We, through the SLIB board, and there are now 3 authorized charter schools, or at least 3 authorized charters for schools through the SLIB board. I think everyone can agree that the SLIB board was a imperfect mechanism. So I signed on to this bill because I believe in school choice. I believe that parents want school choice in Wyoming. There's a huge outpouring for it, and we need a different authorizer mechanism. This is kind of the gold standard to have an independent board. As you work the bill and as the bill moves through the process, the authorizing board certainly could look like just about anything in the world. The key is that it's an independent board. That's really what the key of this bill is. And then that's the number one thing this bill does. And the second thing it does is it wraps some of those funding issues into the bill that we ran into from the last bill, the 100% reimbursement funding for special education, the 100% reimbursement for transportation. Those are key for our students in Wyoming, because right now, under existing law, those charters that were approved, those 3 charters, those kids aren't guaranteed reimbursement in those schools, and that's just not they're just not getting a fair shake. So I won't belabor it. There's many who need to testify on this bill, but I just wanted to give my support behind it, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll go to the agency now and our good superintendent. Welcome to the committee, Superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to visit with you today. My name is Megan Dagenfelder, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. I'm pleased to provide feedback on Senate File 174, Charter School Authorizing Board. Having met with tens of thousands of Wyoming voters on the campaign trail this past year, I can confidently say that Wyoming people want choice. They want individualized education for their children, no matter how rural of a community that they reside. And they want choices within public education. They deserve choices within public education. I was born and raised in Casper, the only district in the state that allows for full school choice. And even as a 12-year-old, I remember attending the various orientation nights for the junior high schools and weighing the pros and cons of each school. That was empowering for myself and for my family to best meet my individual learning needs. Every student in this state deserves that opportunity, and I believe that this bill can be a crucial part of moving that forward. This bill makes great progress in the operation of charter schools in Wyoming, and I truly believe that it is of benefit to our traditional system as well as to these additional charter schools. The collaboration on this bill has been a great effort, and at all times has been focused on what's best for children, what's best for choices of individual families. Our entire public school system, with the traditional model as well as the additional schools, will benefit because competition and increased choices, they raise performance for everyone.
Thank you. To the benefit of students, communities, and our state. So there are 3 main points that I want to make about this bill specifically. The first is that the bill creates a fair charter authorizer. The bill removes the authorizing authority from the State Land and Investment Board and establishes a board of very specialized scope, made up of appointed and qualified individuals. It also requires additional scrutiny regarding public accountability, transparency, and expenditures. Second, the bill addresses funding discrepancies. The Wyoming State Constitution and Supreme Court jurisprudence require that all public education students receive an adequate and equitable education. The bill and its amendments, as presented by Senator Ellis, provide for that equitable education for public school students, which includes charter school students. This bill provides for full ADM allocation, average daily membership, and reimbursement of special education and transportation costs for charter school students. And it also removes the double funding component for charter schools in the early years. And lastly, the bill strengthens charter school accountability. The bill helps to clarify roles and responsibilities between the states, the school districts, and the charter schools. There will be a state board that is fully dedicated to authorizing and monitoring charter schools. Further, the bill reiterates the accountability requirements of charter schools, that they administer the state assessment, that they adhere to state content and performance standards, school finance data collection, and all laws pertaining to the health, life, and safety of students. Additionally, with the budget amendment that Representative Olson and Senator Ellis are running, an additional employee will be added to the State Department of Education to support the Charter School Authorizing Board and to support these charter schools across the state. That 3% administrative fee in this bill will allow to cover those costs of that support for the authorizer and for the charter schools within the department. With that, I'm very appreciative of your time. Would be happy to stand for any questions regarding the bill. Thank you, Madam
Right,
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions, committee? Questions? Yes. Come on up, Senator Ellis.
Madam Chair, if it'd be appropriate, I submitted to you an amendment, and I think it would make sense for the superintendent, since she's here, to maybe walk through some of those suggestions. And visiting with her, they make sense to me and they are important. This bill, I think, is really ready for prime time, but this will, I think, really strengthen what the intent of the bill, will strengthen the bill.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Superintendent Dagenfelder, would you like to take us through your amendment and identify which amendment it is?
Yes, Madam Vice Chairman, this is amendment number 2. Correct? Yes. Okay, so working through these, the first, again, authorizes that full-time position. The second amendment is, let's see, excuse me here. Okay, yes, that's probably, all right, we'll start on page 23, excuse me.
All right. Take your time. We didn't mean to throw you under the bus.
Okay, no, that's
Madam
okay.
Chair, I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
So on page 23, line 2, this is a clarifying amendment that says right now the current language says an agreement between the charter school and the authorizer. This would add the language, a proposed agreement or summary of a proposed agreement, because again, that final charter maybe hasn't been authorized. So that kind of provides that bridge of like the applicant or the soon-to-be authorized charter. So that's just, I think, just clarifies that. And then just to back up the other two amendments on page 1 and page 6, those are clarifying amendments in my view. And then page 23, line 3, that's that language that would just make that clear. And then on page 25, lines 7 and 8, this would remove that language that said if the application has been denied, that the appeal would first go to the superintendent, then to the district court. Because the superintendent serves on the authorizing board, it wouldn't make sense for her to be in that position of being involved in an appeal. So that amendment would just take out that and say that the charter school applicant would appeal to the district court. And then, did I catch you up enough, Madam Chair, to get your
Yes, and then,
organized?
yes, Madam Vice Chairman, so that really leads us into what is, probably the most critical amendment, and that is, again, clarifying that full ADM provision for students. And so this allows for 100% of average daily membership within the funding formula to be allocated to students within the charter schools.
Okay. All right, any questions, committee? Questions on the amendment?
And then, Madam Chair, just to finish, on page 27, lines 10 through 13, that would again strike the paragraph found in Romanet 5 about the extra 5% because it's already covered in 3%. And just doing some calculations and kind of walking through how this might work with the department, I do think that that 3% that is mentioned earlier on in the bill will allow them to meet the needs. And again, those dollars would also be provided for in a report of how the dollars are used, so real clear transparency, which I think is important for this. And then I would also delete section 4 on page 27. This would remove that to FTE. Again, that's something I think we can take care of in the budget, Madam Chair. And then the rest of it's renumbering. So that is the superintendent's amendment. And I thought it might be helpful to separate them out rather than do them together. So that's why you see 2 amendments.
Great.
Madam Vice Chairman, I would just add that 3%, as we've run the numbers, should be enough to cover for that position to be able to support the authorizer and within the supports in the department. We're just, hoping to run that as a budget amendment just to make sure that that funding is consistent and we know that it's available.
Okay, all right. Any questions, committee? Questions? Thank you. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman.
Appreciate it. All right. With that, we'll open it up for public comment. Come on up. Let's get our first public comments. Welcome. All right, go right ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I'd like to start by noting that the WEA supports innovation in public education, including school options that provide for direct involvement by all school employees in the design, implementation, and governance of the programs. However, we further believe that programs such as charter schools should not negatively impact the regular public school program and must include adequate safeguards covering contract and employment provisions for all employees and volunteers, and including health and safety standards for all students and employees, non-discrimination, and equal educational opportunity requirements, staffing by licensed professionals, and financial responsibility. Finally, programs must fully comply with statutory requirements and rules and regulations of other K-12 public schools. Therein lies a number of rubs for us. So first and foremost, in the state of Wyoming, we have an obligation to the students and our educators in our K-12 public schools. That obligation is well established and longstanding in our Constitution, as well as a number of Wyoming Supreme Court cases. Unfortunately, the reality is that the state has failed to meet that obligation for a number of years. The state has failed to meet that obligation as it has failed to implement a cost-based model for education. It has failed to provide an adequate and sustainable external cost adjustment for education. And until we satisfy that obligation, until we take care of the students and our educators who are already here and in our classrooms and learning, we should not be expanding this program. Our priority are our students. It is our educators in our classrooms and our K-12 system. Expanding this program, expanding charter schools is irresponsible. Expanding charter schools and establishing a charter school board for authorization purposes that will open the floodgates to new charter schools, charters that, mind you, do increase the cost of education. We talk about escalators all the time. One of the largest escalators to the increased cost of education this last year were the 3 new charter schools, the one established in Casper, here in Cheyenne, and in Chugwater. Again, our priority needs to be the obligation to our students and educators in the K-12 system first. Additionally, some of the provisions that were in the previous bills over the past couple of years that removed the school districts from the authorization process, it allowed charter schools to select, right? They can either select the State Land Investment Board, or in this case, they can select this Wyoming Charter School Board or the district. That district involvement is key to the success of that school as well as those students. You need not look any further than what happened at Poe-Dare Academy here in Cheyenne and their need to consult and work with the district in regards to financials and operations. That Reciprocal, collaborative relationship is vitally important to the success of all of our schools, as well as the success of our students. I'll turn this over to our president, Grady Hutcherson.
All right.
Madam
Go right
Vice
ahead.
Chair,
Welcome.
good morning. Members of the committee, good morning. I'm Grady Hutcherson. I proudly serve as the president of the Wyoming Education Association. I've taught 24 years, most of those at the second grade level in Torrington, Wyoming. I also am appointed by the governor as a commissioner to the Education Commission of the states. And Madam Vice Chair, may I have a little bit of flexibility? I just wanted to applaud all of you. Last Wednesday, having this room filled with educational experts, and the conversation that took place was really a shining moment. And it really provides that example of how collaboration and working with educators to make decisions to positively impact student performance, it just made me proud, and I was grateful and thankful, and I wanted to lift that up to you and to all of the committee members. One of the items, thank you for that flexibility.
You're welcome.
In regards to the bill, we certainly know that there are proponents of charter schools. I will contend that I'm actually a proponent of every Wyoming student. This charter school bill will potentially provide school choice for some. It will all depend on where you live and the size of that community. We also know that it will certainly increase the cost of K-12 education across the state. And I don't want to belabor what has already been said, but I will tell you, as a proud professional public school educator of 24 years, maybe the most alarming items in this bill that I hope you all will address is the fact, and Senator Ellis alluded to this, the fact that charter schools will now be able to hire uncertified educators. On page 12, it states that the charter school will not be subject to the state's education statutes or any state or local rule, regulation, policy, or procedure relating to public schools. And we know you all regularly have discussions and bring bills forward about all of those items listed for our K-12 schools, and to then make the charter schools not have to not be subject to those is hugely alarming. The uncertified educator, we know one of the number one indicators of student success is certainly the quality of the educator in front of and working with students, particularly our most at-risk students. And to think about this bill allowing for proposed charter schools to be able to hire anyone to do the job is extremely alarming. I do think it potentially poses and raises a constitutionality question in terms of the equal and quality education for all students. And I struggle understanding how the basket of goods would be addressed if charter schools are or aren't or do or don't have to provide that. So I will stop there. And I'd stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Regarding the licensure, I think that's a key component of why the charter schools are so effective. We toured a charter school last year we toured a lot of them actually last year down in the Front Range in Colorado. One of those schools, I think it was called Liberty Common, they hired a retired scientist who is living in the Front Range area. He was just a world-renowned scientist. He didn't have a teaching license, but he was brilliant, and he came in and started their science program, and those students are flourishing there. They're doing a fantastic job. This scientist wouldn't have been able to be hired on at a local public school because of the absolute insistence that we license our teachers. So what would your opposition be to allowing a charter school to bring in people that may not be lifelong educators, but have a lot to give back and that students could really benefit from?
Mr. Hutcherson.
Madam Vice Chair and Senator Beitman, I appreciate you lifting up that example, because we know there are many people with a lot of expertise not in the field of education, because sadly, they're not paid as professionals. And I will share with you, and I don't have it in front of me, but there currently is a process in place for individuals exactly like that scenario that you shared to be able to get their PIC license so that they can be working with our students. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Senator Beitman, I'd also like to respond to that question. So one of the most important aspects of that licensure process, right? It's one thing to know, to be an expert in that content area. There is also an art and a science to teaching. What we know about how students learn, it's not just rote memorization. We've learned that education moves far and well beyond that, as it should. So the science of learning, the age-appropriate materials, that pedagogy, that curriculum, that is a vital component, as important as just that content area knowledge. I think one of the other areas of concern for us with that professionalism piece, it talks within the bill about making accommodations and identifying at-risk, high-need students, students who may need individual education plans. That is something that you learn during your licensure process. And without that understanding in how to identify those students, what that looks like within a classroom because of the science of learning, that becomes highly problematic for us as well.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next up. Welcome.
Good morning. Pardon me. Good morning. I'm Brendan O'Connor. I'm the Executive Director of the Professional Teaching Standards Board. And since that was the last topic, I thought I should weigh in as well. I really hadn't planned on attending this because I don't really have a dog in the fight for charter schools one way or the other so much, but when I heard that this would undo, or they wouldn't have to follow the laws that the legislature has put in place, for example, being licensed in order to receive public funds, undergoing background checks, having different avenues for discipline because of that. I found that a little concerning. And for Senator Beitman's example, we have many examples of that already in our state. We offer a professional industry career permit, a PIC permit, which allows, pardon me, anyone with 2 years of working experience to be hired to teach that content area. Originally, these permits were allowed more for career and technical education because you don't go to college for a bachelor's in welding and so, or auto mechanics. So it started there, but over the past number of years, we've widened that experience so that we can get those retired scientists. Or I worked when I was a teacher, a lady had Microsoft experience, computer science experience. She was able to come in the school on a PIC permit, made our high school computer science program flourish as well. And then as she was teaching and learning, she built her skills in that. So we already offer many avenues to get individuals licensed. We do provide some assurance to the public that they can be monitored and that license can have disciplinary action taken against it, which would then be notified at a national database so that they can't just get fired, move somewhere else and get hired and maybe do something inappropriate somewhere else where it would just pass along. So I would stand for any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions? Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. O'Connor, how much does it cost to get a license? How long does it take to get a license? How much red tape is there in that process?
Well, Madam Vice Chair and Senator Beitman, for a standard, what we would call a standard educator license, that is issued to someone who's gone through a traditional preparation program. It is $240 $25 plus a $50 fee for fingerprinting, which we pass directly on. We collect it, but we pass it on to the Division of Criminal Investigation so that they can run the background check. So that's for a standard one. Our PIC permit, I believe, is at $150, and it also has the $50 fingerprint fee if you're a first-time applicant. All of these are good for 5 years. And really, it's a matter of how long does it take. If we have, for a standard license, we would get your transcripts, your background check back. We get paid our fee so that we can pay the employees. As long as we have everything in place, right now, we are processing it 4 to 6 weeks. And DCI is actually processing their fingerprints at about 3 weeks right now, so that is part of why it takes a little bit of time.
All right, any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
For your testimony. Okay, come on up. You're next, and then in the back of the room, I saw a hand. You'll be next, all right?
Madam Chair, Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association. I want to give you a little background about me. I am a retired superintendent of 3 Wyoming school districts. One was Laramie County School District number 1, which has 2 charter schools in it. So thought that was important for you. I want to give you a little, we do support the concept of an independent authorizing board. We do not believe that it needs to have all the stipulations regarding the members. We believe the president, the speaker, and the governor will do a good job of vetting and putting those people on that board. On page 12, again, the blanket waiver is problematic for us. I believe that it needs to be probably more specific. We do believe that charter schools, like all other public schools, should follow all Wyoming statutes. Currently, the law does allow charter schools the ability to seek a specific waiver, and we would encourage that we continue that. Charter schools should be required to have the same reporting, transparency, accountability, and follow all other statutes that all other public schools do in Wyoming. With that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak and would answer any questions.
Questions, committee? Questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. All right, from the back, we'll start there, and then I had one here, and then you can be next. Another one in the back, all right. All right. Welcome.
Lisa, oh,
That's better, thank you.
good morning, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I am Lisa Grover. I work with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'd like to share 2 points with you. The first is on the blanket waivers. The intent was not for charter schools to get around certification and background checks, especially. I'm a former high school Spanish teacher, so I think that there's ways to work on the certification piece while still allowing for some flexibility for certification. For example, we could certify in the core content subject areas such as math, science, and English, and then allow for flexibility for Senator Beitman's, your example of having a world-renowned scientist teach at a charter school. So I think that there's ways we can work with that. Regarding the blanket waivers, it's important that charter schools have running room to innovate and do something different. The charter school promise is innovation in return for increased accountability. By virtue of having an authorizer, a charter school contract that outlines performance standards, not only in academics, but in financial matters, is the higher level of accountability. It's something that we support very much. I also would like to comment that I personally, but we at the National Alliance, we don't see charter schools as an us versus them. It's very clear after 30 years of charter schooling with 46 states with charter school laws, including Guam and Puerto Rico, that we see ourselves as part of the public education system. And it's unfortunate sometimes that we have adversaries in local school boards. It's unfortunate because I don't think it needs to be that way. However, there are opponents and proponents, as was mentioned. But again, we see ourselves as part of the fabric of public education. We're very clear on that. My last point is I'd like to contextualize this bill within the national context of charter schools. The bill you have in front of you takes from 30 years of lessons learned about charter schools. The provisions in this bill come from the best in show statutes from other states that are doing charter schools very well. However, and very important here is that it is reflective of Wyoming. No state is the same. I think one of the beautiful things about our country is that each state has its own unique flavor and context, and this bill reflects Wyoming's needs and what would work well here in Wyoming. So I think that's an important piece to bring up. What this bill also does is, while there are higher levels of accountability for both charter schools and authorizers, the bill allows for a great deal of flexibility when negotiating a charter school contract terms between the charter school and the authorizer. That's another key piece, is that the authorizer and charter schools have the ability to negotiate what would work best for that charter school, and most importantly, for the students in that charter school. And lastly, I would like to say that when we look around the country, states in the mountain region, for example, have statewide authorizers. That includes New Mexico, where I'm from, Colorado, Idaho, and we can even go to Washington State, where there are independent charter school authorizers. Even the most rural states in the country, and I know Wyoming is one of them, such as Maine, Mississippi, and Alabama, have statewide authorizers. So again, this is nothing overly new. 22 states allow for statewide authorizers, and 40 states out of 46 states have at least 2 authorizers. So again, I think the provisions in this bill is reflective of having the current charter statute more up to date and reflective of what is actually going on in other states whose charter schools are working well. Thank you very much for your consideration, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Questions? Seeing none?
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much. The next is Ms. Delancey.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey, and I'm here on behalf of the members of the Wyoming Business Alliance. As you know, the Wyoming Business Alliance absolutely supports options in education. The business community is strongly in support of making sure that we have alternate learning opportunities to meet all of Wyoming students. I just kind of wanted to touch on a couple of the highlights from the discussions. I have so much to say, but I'll limit myself due to the constraints of time. But the necessity of an independent board, not subject to political pressure, that can truly evaluate the charter applications on its merits is essential. And that's really what, this piece of legislation before you is ensuring. And I applaud the bringers of the bill and the extensive work that's gone into. I don't think that the bringers have left a stone unturned. Now, there might be some adjustments that might be necessary, but overall, I think it's a really good piece of work. In addition, I just wanted to comment, on this blanket waiver provision. I submit to you that that's a red herring. It is clearly the will of, as Dr. Grover just testified, that people are not trying to circumvent or sidestep the requirement of having capable professionals educating our children. That certainly, if it was being done that way, would be picked up in the application on the merits by the independent review board. So I ask you to really take a look at that language, and I think that the clarity will come into clearer focus on the intention there. As far as the testimony remaining that this will open the floodgates, basically the testimony is that competition's bad for Wyoming. This is an effort to modernize our education system. And in Wyoming, as you all know, we love our options. We need our options. And it feels like that we're at a point in time where maybe everyone, whether you're for or against this particular piece of legislation, but it seems that there seems to be a commonality of a need for change. We hear it from students, we hear it from parents, we hear it from the business community, we hear it from educators, administrators. It doesn't really feel like anybody maybe is really happy with what we're doing, and just encourage you to continue to look towards the future. This is the first step to try to improve our education process, and moving this bill to keep the conversation going is certainly something that my members, the leaders in the business community, would ask you. In closing, just on a personal note, I'm a parent of a special needs child, and by having education opportunities available to equip learners that require different needs is really another pathway that I think that this bill accomplishes. So with that, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to address any questions from the committee, but ask you to please move this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Questions? Seeing none. All right, we'll go to the front row here and then we'll skip to the back again. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, Janine Bayteski from Teton County. I too am going to focus on the verbiage on page 12, which allows the charter school an exception to all the state requirements. It saddens me, honestly. It saddens me to think that the innovation and some of the things that are going on in our schools are not recognized, number one. But number two, I do agree with Senator Beitman. I do think that there certainly is room for us to be able to have a little more latitude as well. When I look at some of the experts that live in my community, it would be wonderful to have some of those folks. Yes, they can come in for a day or something like that, but it would really be wonderful to be able to take advantage of the expertise that they bring. We have a dedicated dual immersion school. We struggle immensely trying to get teaching staff because our goal is to have 50% of them native Spanish speakers and 50% of them. And it would be really wonderful if we could find a way to, I would say, be more inclusive and not be held down by some of the constraints. I'll give you an example. We have a retired NBA player who lives in our community. He can't coach our basketball team unless he takes the Constitution test and all kinds of things, which, I understand the Constitution is important and everything, but is it really important to coach basketball? So, I just encourage that as we're moving forward, and I see a lot of stuff happening this session, which really makes me happy, and us trying to, I will say, redefine or refine our education system. I just hope that you can find some way to reflect on this and find some way to open those floodgates to us as well, so that all of us have the opportunity to be able to bring in members of our community to do whatever the waiver allows for.
All right.
Thank you. And I would also suggest that this would be an amazing interim topic. What are those specific statutes that we believe are holding school districts down, and how do you open them up so that we all have the same opportunities? So thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Baycheski, for your testimony. I think that's why I support charter schools and this whole idea of driving innovation, because it does make everybody better. If we do this and charter schools point out, this licensure thing is just maybe the tip of the iceberg of things that they might uncover that they can do better, that we can also make public school, the traditional public schools better. And so we don't even know yet what we don't know. And this could be phenomenal. And I agree wholeheartedly that we need to make these opportunities available also for traditional public schools where there's areas that need to be improved. But as you saw, the lobbyists, the big education lobbyists don't like change. And when we talk about licensure, it's got to be this, this, and this. We can't change it. We like our licensure. We like standards. We like this, this, and this, and we don't change. Well, maybe these charter schools will force that change a little bit for the better, not for the worse. So, do you agree? Sorry.
Wouldn't you agree?
Wouldn't you agree?
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes.
Senator Beitman, I only hope that as we're going through this, like I said, first of all, I would strongly encourage this be an interim topic, but we don't wait for 5 years. We don't wait for, that we capture what are some of those things that we've learned as a result of putting them in place, some of the doors that they have open to them that are not open to us, so we can open them to everybody. Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. You know, on this point, the page 12 language that removes the restrictions is kind of getting to be my favorite part of it, because I look at every other bill that we've passed so far this session is literally us through this committee and through the legislature putting more and more restrictions, more and more bureaucracy, more and more layers of hurdles on local school districts and what they can do top down. This would potentially eliminate all of the stuff that we just heaped on top. And so I guess what I would ask is, your local school board, if this passes, could theoretically just transform any of your local schools into charter schools, and then remove those restrictions, but still maintain all of the policies that you've put in place through your school district. Is that correct? So it actually would provide you with all of the freedom to not have to follow all of the rest of the laws that we've been passing over the last couple of years. Is that accurate?
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, I do believe so. I've actually pondered what would it look like if we just said, we want to be a charter district.
Yeah, so I think I'm liking it more. Thank you.
All right.
So I
Any
thank you.
further questions? All right, thank you so much. In the back of the room, and then we'll come to the middle. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you all. My name is Nathan Winters. I am here today as the chairman of the board of the Cheyenne Classical Academy, starting here in August of 2023 this year. And I want to first and foremost express my appreciation not only for the bill that passed a few years ago that gave us the opportunity to get to where we are today, but also for the work of the staff of the Wyoming Department of Transportation. Pardon me, not the Department of Transportation. Right. We're friends with them all. The Wyoming Department of Education, and they've worked really hard walking with us through the process. And as with a lot of new programs, we have the opportunity to see a lot of areas of further development. And this bill really allows us to consider those areas. This is not new ground to be plowed. As you've heard, many other states have the provisions already in place seen in this bill. And they have those in place and have been doing them for some time in other charter school programs. And what has made charter schools so successful is their ability to innovate. This bill allows for that. And it's already been mentioned, so I won't go over those issues again. But this is designed to allow more educational options for children. And at the end of the day, we believe that allowing families in our state to find the very best options for the individual needs of their children is what is best. With that being said, also, I just want to add that I just want to make sure that it is seen that ensuring equitable funding, as we have looked over the process of building out our school, there are hurdles to getting anything started. And so the way this bill allows us to move forward to 100% of the ADM for children allows us to innovate a little bit more quickly as we start our school here in Cheyenne. And so I appreciate so many of the elements of this bill. That one is a very important one for many of the charter schools, hopefully, that will continue the process of growing in the state of Wyoming. So with that, Madam Chairman, I appreciate your time.
All right, any questions? Questions? Go ahead, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Winters, what's the time frame from start to finish to get a charter school going in the state of Wyoming? And how do you see that changing with this bill? And does the bill help speed that process along? And can you kind of walk us through time horizon from conception to opening the doors and having the students in the classroom?
Thank you. Madam Chairman, Senator, that's a very good question. And so about 3 years ago, I sat down with a couple of gentlemen who, because of their age, have had to step away from the board now, but who had a vision for how this could get started. That was about 3 years ago. And so we actually stood up with a group out of Michigan and asked them, what are the steps that you've seen in getting a charter school going? And what their timeline showed was oftentimes between 4 to 6 years. We have worked really, really hard, and with assistance, because the state of Wyoming does listen to its citizens quite well. We've been able to accomplish so much more in just the 3 years, but it has been hard work, and it has allowed us to get to where we are. But it can take some time, because what we're doing here, we recognize as a public charter school, and we are holding ourselves to the highest of standards. And so because of that, we are very careful and deliberate in every step that's taken.
Further questions, Senator Rothfuss?
My apologies, Madam
Right.
Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Winters, I have a couple of questions about the interactions and kind of the relationship with that group out of Michigan and how things proceeded with that. And, you know, there have been concerns related to the ideas of charter school models that are for profit for organizations that are elsewhere out of state. So I'd just like to explore that a little bit. Was there any financial assistance given by the out-of-state institution to your charter school as it was moving forward?
Madam Chairman, at this point, no. One of the things that they have allowed for us to consider is the opportunity to help with teacher training over time, a lot of those different things. But one of the things they allow for is for a full package of curricula that we are able to access. And so that actually is the greatest benefit that we can receive with the expertise that comes with that curricula.
And Madam Chairman, is there any subscription fee to that curriculum, or is that curriculum provided for free?
Madam Chairman, that curriculum is provided for free.
Okay. And Madam Chairman, are there any ongoing costs associated with a relationship with that entity? I mean, do they have any fees that they charge? Do they have any requirements or strings attached? Or is it fully just a voluntary cooperation between the two entities?
Madam Chairman, to my knowledge, there's no fee. I'd have to double check and get back with you on that. But to my knowledge, that is one of the major relationships. There's no funding that's happening like that. That is done for free.
And Madam Chairman, so when you say the curriculum is for free, the materials, but you'd probably have to purchase the actual paper copies, or is it literally a line item curriculum, $0, and an entity in Michigan is shipping all the goods here?
You know, Madam Chairman, I'm not sure if, because a lot of the curriculum, for instance, for Singapore math, comes from something totally, a completely different entity. And so I would imagine we would have to purchase from whoever the publisher of Singapore math is, whatever that would be. But the structure of the curriculum is something that is provided for free.
Okay, and Madam Chairman, if you could actually get me more information on that and kind of what the cost model associated with distribution of the curriculum is going to be, not just up front, but in coming years, that would be appreciated, because that is a concern that I've heard and common with other charter schools that operate in other states where there's kind of a cost subscription model. So I'd be interested in learning more about that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
You're welcome.
Madam Chairman, I can
All
provide
right.
that.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And next we'll go in the middle here. Come on up. Welcome to the committee. If you could just state your name and if you're representing an organization.
Good morning. My name is Ann Lucas. I'm a private citizen. I'm a mother and a grandmother. I live in Laramie County. I was able to attend a meeting of our new charter school a couple of weeks ago, and I must say I was pretty impressed. Special thanks to Mr. Nathan Winters. He has worked very hard on this. I just have commentary and just a couple of opinions. I'll be very brief. I read recently at the NAEP report card, which is nationsreportcard.gov, that Wyoming leads the nation practically in fourth grade reading scores. Sadly, less than 40% of our fourth graders read at grade level. I guess $2 billion ain't what it used to be. Parents and grandparents, all of the stakeholders in this, the personal stakeholders, are terrified right now at what is happening to public education nationally. And I thank God that we live in Wyoming. That said, our kids are not, we need more choices, and parents are crying for this. It sounds like public school administrators, agencies, trade organizations are fearing some competition. In communities where there have been our public charter schools, the public schools in the area kind of step up their game a little when they get some competition. And I think that competition is very good. My husband is a professional healthcare provider, and if less than 50% of his patients survived, he would not be in business. Just saying, 40% is not very good. So I hear fear of change, I hear fear of competition, but if we continue to do what we have always done, we're going to get what we've gotten, and it's not good enough. So I encourage you to promote this bill, to pass it to the floor. We need a change, and we must have it. So many folks now are just talking about pulling out of the public school system and homeschooling, and we see it in every community in the state. And I can give you resources on those types of organizations that do that because I'm very involved with them. This is too important to pass up. I would answer any questions you have.
Thank you for your comments. Questions, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Ms. Lucas, is that
Yes.
correct? Thank you. Ms. Lucas, I do have a question. So with regard to the NAEP scores that you reviewed in fourth grade for math, we're first in the country. In
Reading,
fourth grade
sir.
For
Sorry.
reading, we're second in the country. So the state of Wyoming is best in the country in fourth grade, effectively. Why would the state of Wyoming, if we're best in the country, even if we could do better, obviously we could do better, why would we look to other states for guidance and follow where right now we have effectively a restrictive charter school model that requires local district buy-in? And your district has 2 charter schools already, is my understanding. Mine does as well. Why would we change that to emulate states like Mississippi, which I believe Mississippi is dead last in the country in fourth grade reading? It might be Mississippi, might be Alabama. Anyway, they're at the lower list. So looking for guidance from states that are not performing as well as us, why would that be our approach?
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, I admit I don't know what you're referring to. I did say at first I was a private citizen. I'm not an attorney. I have not been involved in setting up a charter school. So I apologize, I can't answer that.
Well, Madam Chairman, I mean, the question was that you were suggesting we needed change. And I guess the idea that the change that we need is to look more like other states that are performing less well than we are. It just doesn't seem like that's the logical approach. And I'm wondering why that's what you're advocating for, to improve our NAEP scores further when we're top of the country right now.
Madam Chair, Senator, I don't think that being top of the chair right now is anything to brag about. And I think that we must do what is best for our students and not what is best for agencies or trade organizations. We must do what is best for our students.
Well said.
And if that means something different, then that's what we must do, regardless of whether the state of Mississippi has charter schools or not.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Lucas. All right, is there any further public comment? Come on up. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Committee. My name's Marguerite Herman, and I'm speaking here as a former school board member. I just came off 2 terms on the LCSD1 board, and I'm one of the few people in the room who has actually approved a charter and renewed charters as well. As Mr. Brown said, we have 2 charter schools in Cheyenne. And I just want to make the point, first of all, I support the idea of this Uber board that's going to have the expertise to approve and then do follow-up support, because that relationship between LCSD1 and the Podair Academy and Secondary School was very important as far as helping them get their application set to begin with, and has been partner, as also mentioned, all through and continues to this day. We want them to succeed in every way. But I guess there's only one kind of caution I would ask you to have, is because the Podair and LCSD1 are integrated, is to not set up a two-tier system. The charter schools do not exist in a bubble. They should, and so kind of like what Janine testified is that sideboards that are removed should be removed for everyone, because what we experienced here is children would come and go, Podair to a traditional public school, back and forth a lot. And so what happens in one setting has to be able to translate pretty seamlessly, or the children are just lost. They're just, because they've had a different system, they're not, and it may not be it's less, but it's just, it's different levels, and it did create a lot of struggles for kids and families when they went back and forth and were not ready. Issues were not identified, and so I guess what I'm saying is that, and I just sort of wrote down, we do a lot of sports, coordinate arts, because of course this charter school can't cover all the bases. They're very small. They have about 200, 150 kids. And our schools, obviously secondary schools, are large, and there are a lot of extensive programs, and we do welcome their students to come and participate, band, music, all kinds of things. So they have, so you can't create school in a bubble with a whole different set of restrictions and statutes that they follow, because it's very, very difficult on those kids. They will come and go, and you want them to, right? I mean, I think that's, and we have cooperative agreements. We used to start it out on food service, but also transportation, special ed. We used to share resources, the mobility piece, transportation piece. So I guess that's just sort of what I witnessed in LCSD1, that there was just a lot of cooperation, a lot of support going back and forth. And it was a unique school. It is a unique school. I can tell you that. They maintain that throughout. And so they do offer something that is not offered in our other schools, but the kids come and go, and there's just a lot of cooperation between them. So once again, not a bubble. I am glad that the provision in the bill for equal funding for the students, ADM, because initially I remember the first discussions a few years ago was that, well, the charter schools would only get 80% of the ADM, which like de facto is not constitutional. That was not going to work, and I think none of us felt good about that, a school operating with less than the cost based, which is never made any sense. So I'm really glad that that is brought up. Equal funding, and that again achieves what I just mentioned. Equal funding, equal adherence. I know that they'll have to do federal rules like Title IX, et cetera. So that'll be the same. State, it's that disconnect I think could be kind of a problem, because those schools are small, and they will need to access some of the local district resources. And we want them to. That's a good thing, to round out, make sure the kids have access to all the education needs they have. So I just offer that. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Herman? Questions? Seeing none, thank you. Do we have any further public testimony? Further public testimony, and we're not taking testimony online in this committee, right? So I guess public testimony is closed, and we'll invite Senator Ellis back to help us work this legislation. Committee, what is your pleasure on the bill?
Move to pass.
Moved by Senator Beitman. Is there a second? I usually require seconds in my committees. I'll second. Oh. Yes, but we just are moving and seconding, so I'll second it. And then we'll go through the proposed amendments. So everyone, we've had 2 amendments passed out, and Kim, do you have those amendments as well? All right. So let's go to Amendment 1. Does anyone want to move that amendment? Moved by Senator Beitman, seconded by me.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead,
do you want me to
Senator
walk you through these amendments?
Yes,
Maybe go through the whole page? Or all of these amendments as they would track in. So the first amendment would be on page 4. It would remove paragraph H, starting on line 19. And this says, in case of gross negligence or reckless disregard for the safety and well-being of student, the board and its members are immune from civil liability. Senator Scott and I talked about this, and we believe that this is already covered in the governmental immunity provisions in statute elsewhere. So we didn't need to include it, so that's why you'll see that proposal there. So on lines, moving on to the amendment, you'll see renumbering on page of the paragraphs on page 5, lines 2 and lines 5. Page 6, you'll see the change on line 14. This says that charter schools authorized are allowed to apply for or receive or administer, instead of a grant, we just want to say grants to make sure that they're not limited to just one grant. Page 6, line 15, it would insert the word which require LEA status. So the whole thing would say that charter schools authorized to operate pursuant to the statutory reference to apply for, receive, or administer grants through a grant program created by a federal or state statute or program which require LEA status. We thought that was just tightening up the language because usually those grants require such status. Local education authority. Page 8, line 3, you'll see the word, the insertion of any interviews or presentations. This is in the approval of charters. This would require the authorizer to base decisions on the renewal, non-renewal, and revocation of charters using any interviews, presentations, and documented evidence, because these that we've seen, so far we've seen with the authorizing board, they have appeared before the SLIB and they answer questions, they appear live, so we just wanted to make sure that that information provided during interviews and presentations was included in decision-making. Page 8, line 7, you'll see, just tightening this up, and this is something I actually feel strongly about, rather than saying simply avoid conflicts of interest, insert here, follow policies that are transparent based on merit, and require members to disclose any conflicts and abstain from voting on any matters where a conflict exists or may exist. I think that language just tightens that up. Page 9, line 14. This is a stylistic one that Senator Scott wanted to strike the word all and insert the word the. So it says grant charters to applicants that possess competence in the elements of the charter application. Page 12, line 21, he got rid of the word such and inserted the word 12. That's a stylistic thing. I think that's consistent with our statutes. And then page 13, line 4, this is important. This would insert the words, nothing shall be, this is on the exemptions of what the charter schools are exempt from. We wanted to add the sentence, nothing in the subsection shall be deemed to exempt the charter school from all state and federal laws pertaining to the health, life, and safety of students, to the administration of school finances. Hopefully that tightens up some of the concerns. This isn't a free-for-all for charter schools. So if they're in a building that's not safe, they can't be there because it's not safe. Page 14. Yep.
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
So I do actually have a little bit of a question on that page 13, line 4 amendment. So how would this pertain to school facilities, health, life, and safety of students? All of the statutes related to school facilities really are educational suitability, and they get into health, life, and safety concepts. A lot of those school facility standards for buildings are higher in certain instances than what building code would be. And I guess I'm asking if there was any thought given to that.
Thank you.
Ellis.
Madam Chair, in the application, I think this is where, when they're going through the criteria of what needs to be in the application and what will ultimately be approved, that can be made on a case-by-case basis. So I think you've seen charter schools that operate, I think in your community, in an old big box store, working through all of that to make sure that if there needs to be some kind of deviation from those school facility standards, that it's taken into consideration and the ultimate authorizer can look at it and make that determination. So I think by having that language in there, it really allows us to flesh that out through the application process, is how I see that.
Thank you. One follow-up on that, though. A lot of this relies on the application process, but there doesn't seem to be as much governance after the application is approved. It's like upfront, you have to meet these requirements. Do you still have to meet the requirements afterwards?
Madam Chair, my understanding is yes. And I think when I read the bill taken together, and it's a big bill, so it's hard to digest, I think there is that constant expectation. And we didn't talk about it entirely, but in visiting with the superintendent's office, some of those positions when her office will also not only oversee and support the board's activity, but actually provide support to the charters directly. So my vision of this is it's a continual thing and something that'll be looked at when they're doing their renewal applications.
From a support standpoint, but I guess my question is, I don't see a real enforcement mechanism. I see that through the traditional model, through the school districts providing funding and having direct oversight, as well as really the authority to, we'll say, defranchise, I guess, an existing charter school. And maybe I'm just missing it, but I don't necessarily see an authoritative oversight where if a school district is not complying with whichever remaining laws they have to comply with, I don't know who could do anything about that or what would be done other than a lawsuit being brought by a private citizen against the charter school that I believe the state would be on the hook for, but would not really have direct control over the actions to remedy anything that came through the courts. Am I missing something? And I just might get at the fact that it probably would have been something to talk about during the interim rather than as an individual bill.
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, I think the consequences are different. Unlike a traditional public school where we have to worry about that because we presume that that school is going to continue to remain open, this has language in there about grounds for revocation. And it is, if you're not satisfactorily meeting the obligations that are in your application or in contracts, your charter can be revoked. And even further, we need to know your protocols for shutting down if you're not doing your job. And so we've heard testimony, Senator Beitman and I toured a number of charter schools, visited with people who have started and actually had to close charter schools. One other measure is if they're not doing their job and students aren't showing up, they fail and they go away. And that's, what the testimony we heard is a really healthy check on these charter schools. So it is a different mentality, but to me, that's the check, is if they're not meeting these obligations, students leave or their charters aren't renewed.
Madam
Good.
Chairman, one more follow-up on that.
Go ahead.
But if there is, just so that I understand, and I think this is accurate, if there is a lawsuit filed against a charter school, we'll say for violation of equal protection or something along those lines, it is my understanding that the state of Wyoming is responsible for it, even though the charter school board of individuals, which is not elected, it's all internal individuals that don't really have any oversight over them. Those individuals are binding the state through their decisions to liability that the state would have to assume. Is that accurate?
Madam Chair, I'd like to look into that a little bit more and happy to work with the senator on a committee of the whole amendment if we need to tighten that language up.
Yes, are you satisfied, Senator Rothfuss?
I guess my next question, at least something to think about, is who would be if not the state? I mean, I honestly can't fathom an alternative. I think the state has to be, and I don't know that that's good. So I don't know what the amendment would be, but it's certainly something that I would like to know more about. Thank you.
Okay, we'll look into that. Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Ellis, did you have I think we had one more to cover, the shall to may.
Yep, the shall to may on page 14. This is any services for which a charter school contracts with a school district shall be provided by the district at the incremental cost and may be negotiated as an agreement separate from the charter contract between the charter school and the authorizer. Just recognizing that sometimes we can't force those negotiations. We want people to work together, but it works better as permissive language. And again, these are Senator Scott's suggested amendments. I've weighed in where I feel strongly about some of them, so I just would say I'd offer that as a Senator Scott kind of amendment too.
All right, committee, we've Heard the explanation of the amendment. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. We're on the second amendment that was presented by our State Superintendent of Public Instruction. What's your pleasure on this amendment?
Move the amendment.
Moved by Beitman, seconded by Brennan. Is there any discussion on this amendment? Do we need to go back through it, or do you feel satisfied with the explanation we've already had from Senator Ellis and our superintendent? Yes,
And-
Senator Rothfuss.
My apologies for not being here at the time. I was in another committee, and so if this was covered,
Yes.
I apologize. But I understand this is, in my view, clearly required from an equity standpoint, and this was an objection I had to the bill that was passed last year, is that there was no question that we would have to go to 100% because it would be wildly unconstitutional to pass the bill without being at 100%. The justification at the time by the proponents of the bill was that there would be no problem for charter schools to cost substantially less than 80% due to the expensive nature of the school districts, and that the advantage of passing the bill would be that we'd be able to save a substantial amount of money and provide the same services. I guess I just am curious about what changed in 1 year, since that was effectively the underlying justification for passing that last charter school bill. And here we are now admitting that it's wildly unconstitutional to have done that. So is there any thoughts on that by proponents of the bill?
Senator Ellis.
Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, I would disagree about the wildly unconstitutional. I think when we discussed this, working the bill last time, there's some case law out of Arizona, and so I disagree with that characterization. But I would ask, with your indulgence, Madam Chair, maybe I see the Chief of Staff for the department and the superintendent to explain that piece again. We did cover it while you were, I know, in another committee. That's the
We'd be
nature of
glad
what
to
we do.
that for you,
Sure.
Senator Rothfuss. Mr. Shaner, thanks for coming back.
Thank you,
Can
Madam
you help
Chair.
us out a little?
Sure,
Okay,
through you,
thank
Senator
you.
Rothfuss, good question. It does come down to that issue of just fairness and equity. These are public school kids and they should be entitled to that funding that other public school kids get.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I think this is a real fundamental concept here. So the superintendent believes that without this, it would be unconstitutional because of equity. But Senator Ellis and proponents of the bill suggest that that's not a problem. I guess I don't know why we would increase the cost through this. This is a costly amendment, right? This is moving from 80% to 100%. So it's a 20% increase in cost per ADM. I think we should really know whether it is or isn't unconstitutional, so we don't have to increase the cost.
Yeah, Madam Chair, through you to the senator, I don't think the constitutionality of 80 to 100 is entirely settled. But just regardless of what the lawyers in the courts might say, it's just on its face an equity issue that the superintendent believes the charter schools should be funded like the public schools.
Madam Chair, and I'd add
Go
this.
ahead.
You know, there are scenarios right now where the district, if they approve, certain funding goes to the district. And so I think there is concern about how that's handled when you have a separate authorizer. Certainly, when we worked on this bill last time, there was a lot of resistance in having even 3 schools authorized and approved. And so one premise is that charter schools can do the same job for less. And I think when it comes to certain things, that's true. The example that we both use and we're familiar with are charter schools that operate in former big box stores. They don't have all of the bells and whistles that your traditional bricks and mortar school have. They don't have big fields. They don't have big common areas, things that are costly and expensive to maintain, to staff, all of those kinds of things. So I think that there's an argument to be made there. And it seemed appropriate to me when we were launching the 3 pilot projects to demonstrate whether or not Wyoming had an appetite and interest for these charter schools. But as we go forward and moving forward, I do think that this is an important component of the bill, is that full funding. So I don't share the constitutional concerns that you have, because that's how other charter schools have operated in other states. But we're Wyoming, and I think that there's real innovation to be had if we start allowing for that full funding. And then just some of the funding mechanisms of how those dollars float back and forth. To me, if we're going to do this going forward and opening it up broader, it makes sense to do it the right way.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Ellis. All right, any further questions? Any further questions on the amendment for our good bringer while they're here? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. This amendment has been adopted. Well, committee, we are ahead of schedule. Senator Scott didn't think we would get through all of our public testimony and working the bill. Are there any further amendments from the committee? Seeing none? Yes, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
And my apologies, I probably should have asked Senator Ellis as well. I guess we were on the other amendment, but just a little subtle point on the makeup of the Charter School Authorizing Board on page 2. Romanettes 2 and 3 have one member appointed by the President of the Senate, one member appointed by the House of Representatives. Generally, that's contemplated to be a separation of powers violation if the legislature appoints to an executive board. It's not to say it hasn't been done before, but it's often contemplated to be a violation of the separation of the branches where we are not supposed to have executive authority outside of, well, we're not supposed to have executive authority. Was that discussed? I've seen it removed from a lot of bills in the past because of that, and I guess I'd ask a proponent of the bill if it was discussed, and up to you whether you want to do
Ellis,
it.
would you mind coming back up?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. So a lot of people have been working on this bill. In my recollection, that hadn't been discussed, and I'm happy to look at that further and just kind of get a lay of the land of, you know, those boards and commissions where we do allow the president, the Senate, and the speaker to appoint people. I think we do that in task forces. It's maybe what the familiarity that we have with that, but maybe not to a permanent board or commission. So happy to investigate that more with Senator Rothfuss. And, you know, if we need to bring it again, committee of the whole amendment, happy to discuss that.
Yeah, I only know of, Madam Chairman, one board, which is a federal board, and it actually requires appointment by legislative branch, awkwardly. The rest of the boards and commissions are only executive appointees if they have authority. I think that's accurate, but I'd just ask you to check with the governor's office on it honestly and see if the governor's going to have concerns. If the governor has no concerns with separation of powers, I won't have concerns on his behalf, I guess.
Happy to circle back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ellis, and thank you for the good discussion, tightening up this good little bill. So with that being said, any further discussion on the bill, committee? All right, seeing none. Kim, would you call the roll, and then we'll leave the vote open for Senator Scott.
Senator Beitman.
Aye.
Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss. Senator Steinmetz.
Aye. And again, we'll leave the vote open for our good chairman. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. We're adjourned.